When I was 16 years old, I discovered photography and I fell in love with it, and I decided I wanted to be a photographer.
When she was a teenager, Shannon Taggart had an unusual experience.
Around that same time, my cousin went to Lilydale, New York, which is the world's largest spiritualist community, and I grew up nearby. And you can go in the summer. They have these outdoor message services in the woods. And you just sit on a bench anonymously, and the medium stands in the front and just randomly picks people and gives them short messages. And so my cousin did this and ended up getting this very strange message from a medium she had never met before, describing the details of my grandfather's death, which was a kind of like this bizarre family secret that nobody had really talked about in a very long time. My cousin came home from Lilydale with the true story, and I remember my whole family being really shocked and kind of electrified by this experience. And I just thought in my head, how could somebody possibly know such a thing?
Welcome to The Extraordinary Project, Season 2. I'm Suzanne Clores. Today we're talking about what happened after that Lilydale message service, and how Shannon Taggart took a journey into spirit photography to see if she could capture just what mediums could see with her camera.
And so then I became a professional photographer. I was working as a photojournalist for newspapers. Then I got a job in PR photography, and it was kind of boring to me, so I wanted to work on something in my spare time. But I thought, Lilydale is such an interesting place. Maybe I'll spend a couple weeks there.
For most people, mediumship and mediums, those individuals practiced in the art of spirit communication, are a curiosity. And most of the time, that curiosity sits in the back of the mind, undisturbed.
It led to a 17-year, almost 18-year-long project.
She found out the mediums at Lilydale are actually part of a religion called spiritualism.
Spiritualism believes that we do not die, that the soul is eternal, and that living people can communicate with spirits of the dead. Really, the heyday of spiritualism is roughly 1848 to 1933.
Lilydale is part of a geographical area known as the Burned Over District, where lots of ecstatic spiritual practices were born. But spiritualism was different, and Lilydale became a hub.
There was a train that went right there, and it was kind of like a posh summer camp for radicals and intellectuals, suffragettes, abolitionists, and all of these people were mixing in spiritualist camps and spiritualist churches.
Spiritualism was unique for a lot of reasons, but one reason was because it appealed across class lines. The working class, the middle class, the educated class all wanted to believe they could stay connected to their dead.
War, disease, infant mortality, there was so much death. It would wane, and then, after World War I, there was another resurgence. Especially women who lost children did not want to believe that their children would be in hell or purgatory or anything like that. That was like one of the big, huge factors. The grieving mother, still to this day, is one of the forces that drives the spiritualist movement.
As an artist visiting Lilydale now and then for her project, Shannon found that she couldn't really separate her work from the religion.
Part of the reason the project became such a massive thing for me is because I found out about the history of spiritualism, which ties into the radical reform, the women's rights movement, the very birth of modern art, the history of photography. Specifically, the ties to the history of photography really blew me away. I didn't realize that when photography became a practice in 1839, and spiritualism was born in 1848, and almost immediately people were using cameras to try to prove spiritualist theory. In fact, I love this part, that the first public seances that were held in America with the Fox sisters, or the young girls who kind of accidentally started this religion, were held in Rochester, New York. Literally, down the block from where Kodak's headquarters were going to be a few years later. So spiritualism and photography were brought to the masses on the same street, literally buildings away from one another.
Shannon became preoccupied with the overlapping questions shared by spiritualism and photography. The religion from the very beginning seemed fixed in this morass of truth versus fraud. The Fox sisters are a perfect example, a family of 3 preteen girls who started the spiritualist movement by accident, playing a trick on their mother and then quickly convincing their neighbors and an audience of thousands. Even after the sisters admitted to trickery in their seances, many spiritualists still believed in their abilities. It is the only religion with an almost exclusive focus on proof, which is why the camera became such a valuable tool. Not surprisingly, Shannon was captivated by the spirit photography movement.
The photographer named William Mumler in Boston, who claimed to be photographing the deceased side by side with the living. And people would go to his studio and thinking of their deceased relative, and he would make an image for them. But it evolved into people bringing cameras into seance rooms.
To be perfectly honest, spirit photography is kind of weird, and not good weird.
I always say it's the most absurd, bizarre moment in the history of photography, the visuals that came out of that. And they look very fake and phony, but everybody who was there many of the times believed that the images actually were documents of the spirit world. And part of it was in the spiritualist photography, there is a substance that you can see in these images called ectoplasm. White, gauzy substance. In some pictures it looks like cheesecloth, in some pictures it looks like smoke, in some pictures it looks like cotton. But it's this substance that spiritualists believe merges life with death. And these pictures blew my mind because they were unsettling in a way that no other images I had ever seen were. And they were also written out of the history books that I studied from. This elusive, mysterious substance that oozes from the body of the medium and gives presence to the dead and to spirits. I found that the spiritualists that I was meeting believed in the reality of ectoplasm. And I became obsessed with the idea, are there mediums out there still trying to produce ectoplasm? I discovered that, yes, there were mediums out there, but most of them were in Europe or England. So I began traveling to try to find what I could that was left of this culture.
So there are 4 types of people involved in Shannon's search. There are the spiritualists, the members of the religion, who believe the dead are accessible to the living. Then there are the mediums, those who facilitate communication with the dead. There's Shannon herself. And then there are the spirits. I want to talk about the spiritualists first.
It seems silly now to contemporary people who hear that spiritualism believes that it's a science as well as a religion and trying to merge science and religion. But when spiritualism came about, there was Nobel laureates investigating. The word ectoplasm, the term, came from Charles Richet, who was a Nobel laureate in medicine. And it's understandable because at that time they were discovering radiation, germ theory, electricity was being harnessed, the telegraph, the telephone, like disembodied communication. The thought that all of these powerful forces at work around us that are invisible to our senses, it was just a kind of a no-brainer to say, well, what else can we see with technology?
To some degree, we're still in that phase of mass invention, although it's 150 years later. But between ancestry research, gene research, and AI, we're still, as a culture, deep in that process of discovering the unseen with technology. So Shannon started going to seances and focusing on the mediums.
Early on in the project, I didn't see that my images were really, truly speaking to the psychological reality of the events that I was trying to document. And I became very frustrated, and I started to think maybe spiritualism isn't something that you could photograph. So what happened is I started to have happy accidents with my camera. I was in a seance room, and they were using red light. The person who had the red light would sit and try to meditate or go into trance or bring through spirits, and everybody in the room would observe and kind of say what they were seeing. And so the light gets passed to this woman, and everybody in the room just starts saying, "Oh, we can see a face, and it's just like yours, but it's not exactly like yours, and it's floating right next to you, and it looks like it could be your grandmother. Maybe it's your doppelganger. Maybe it's the spirit of Marie Laveau." They're all seeing this face, and I cannot see this face with my eyes. And when I got the film back, on one of the frames, there was a face floating right next to her face. It looked like it was streaming off. And it looked like her, but kind of didn't. It was exactly what everybody was clairvoyantly viewing in that room. I understand that it was a low light exposure, and that I had a drag shutter, and that motion is a factor. I completely understand the technical part. But the synchronicity thrilled me. My camera shutter handed me this perfect visual for what the unseen reality of the event was for everybody else. Several things like that happened to me, where there were very eerie synchronicities that I wasn't intending, where the process, the glitch, the play, the mistake, the accident handed me what I needed or what I wanted, what I was trying to do but wasn't doing with my conscious mind. So I decided, well, I'm just going to really play with this. And in that sense, when they train you to be a professional photographer, you're supposed to clean all of that stuff out of your process. And instead I went opposite. And then I really tried to embrace it. And I tried to put myself in as many chance-like situations as possible and tried to break down the process. I tried to unlearn the technical in a way. So I tried to give up as much control as I could to the process. I tried to automate the process.
In a sense, Shannon did what a spiritualist would do. She automated the process, or let go, in order to capture the mediums as they engaged with the essence of spirit.
Automatic writing, automatic speaking, kind of going to the unconscious or the automated process rather than the conscious mind.
Think of what you've seen on television or in films that depict classical seances, where the medium is speaking in a weird voice. That's a depiction of automatic speaking that happens in trance or hypnosis. Now, think of a photographer giving her camera over to automation and allowing spirit to come through, and you'll have an idea of what Shannon Taggart's images look like. They are truly otherworldly, and sometimes you can see spirit, and other times you can just sense it's there. Something about the photos almost feels possessed. I asked her, did she ever find ectoplasm?
I did find ectoplasm. What I found two things. Was that the physical mediums that I met, many of them believe that they are working with ectoplasm, but that ectoplasm can be like an ether or an energy that works on the body. You put a medium in a very dark room with a low red light, and you stare at the medium, and your eyes start to see them change shape. Now, a neuroscientist would say, oh, that's your brain is kind of making patterns because there's not a lot of information, is trying to make you hallucinate a little bit. But a spiritualist would say, no, that's ectoplasm that you're seeing. That's the energy, and we're transforming, and we're showing you that, we can go beyond our bodies.
I was still unclear about the nature of ectoplasm, besides that one scene in the original Ghostbusters where Dan Aykroyd exclaims, "It's ectoplasmic residue." I didn't have a clear idea of what it was or where it came from.
Well, I mean, it does tie into that early scientific thoughts about the ether, or also the discovering plasma, or or liminal states like spider webs or chrysalis of caterpillars, or so it's kind of was thought of in that kind of a way, or like a birthing substance, like the smell, the way they describe it, it smells like semen or smells like ozone, and it oozes out of the body, and the mediums go into this like birth state. And so it's like other bodily substances. I had another, really bizarre photographic experience with this man named Gordon Garforth. He's a medium, he's a physical medium, and I photographed him quite a bit. And we were sitting in like a sanctuary where the only thing lighting the room was a small green security light. And he said, "Oh, let's do a trance session right now." And he said, "I'm going to go into trance and I'm going to try to show you my ectoplasmic masks." And so I took a bunch of pictures, and in all the pictures he looked different from the way he does in real life, and from each picture kind of looked unique. And, they're long exposures. I understand that there's blur and there's a lot of motion rendering, but some of them were just truly creepy. And there was one where I was actually scared of this picture because he had a little mustache, and I thought it looked kind of Hitler-esque, and I didn't want to show him this image. And he saw it on my computer, and he said, "That picture, oh my God, that is the picture." And so then he took me to his house, and he showed me a picture of his great-grandfather, and it is like the spitting image. And so he explains that. That's explained via ectoplasm.
So there's a phenomenon that has happened to me since starting this project. Once you start to ask your subjects to explain their alternate reality, you start to see it more clearly, and you're no longer just kind of pretending to believe them. As the physical medium's psychological reality started showing up on Shannon's camera, she was still very clear on the technical reality of that shift.
He's giving his body to the spirits and he's altering your senses by putting you in this different light.
I asked Shannon if she believed she was photographing ectoplasm.
It's interesting because a lot of times people will just say, "Oh, well, it's just long exposure, who cares?" And who does care? Okay, but if you think about time, what is time? Time is a very bizarre thing to use to build a piece of art. In my break time, I worked on 2 different projects, and one of them was a portrait series where I used motion. And it really is interesting to me. I think I've played with motion as much as any photographer possibly could. And it really is interesting to me how things render differently in certain situations. I don't feel that the pictures I make in non-spiritualist settings are really the same. Seems to be something about the person's essence that comes through in the motion that they create or surrounds their body. The dead having a place in the lives of the living, or presence or communication, is for us to think it's weird in the minority. It's more weird to have a culture that doesn't have that.
The more I talked to Shannon, the more it became clear to me that I would see exactly what she was talking about if we traveled together. So we agreed to go on a trip. Next time on The Extraordinary Project, a report from our adventures to Leeds, England. Shannon Taggart's work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Time Magazine, and her spiritualist photos have been collected into a book called Seance, due out this month by Fulgar Press. The Extraordinary Project was created by me, Suzanne Clores. Audio engineering and sound design is by Malika Gumpangam, and musical compositions by David Weiner. If you like The Extraordinary Project, tell all your friends. Until next time.